because I'm not really quite sure the events that have happened for you, Mike. And I think it's worthwhile having a discussion because, we're soon we're going to have Congressman Andrew Garbarino on the show, and like you're a political insider, and he's a political insider. I'm going to take the role as the political outsider, right? That I really don't know much about politics. Like I understand what's kind of going on and how what a cluster that maybe Washington D.C. is, but you understand local politics much better. Partially, I believe, if I got this right, you were just appointed commissioner. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've lived in the city of Pembroke Pines for over 15 years. We are in the southwest corner of Broward County, which is best known for Fort Lauderdale, and about 35 miles northwest of the city of Miami. We're just in the neighboring county. We had a vacancy. Our District 4 commissioner became the mayor. He won the election in March. And by the city commission's approval, you can appoint a commissioner for a 6 month period and then host a special election to elect someone permanently to the position for the remainder of the term. At first, two commissioners did not want to appoint anyone. They wanted to leave the seat vacant. I led a charge from the outside as a resident of District 4 saying you absolutely need to appoint someone, whether it's me or anyone else. We need a representative. Not only could it be illegal in Florida to vote on a budget as we do during the summer months, to vote on it without a completed or a completely full commission. In some parts of Florida, the Department of Revenue says your budget's not valid without that.
Hmm.
But also, it's wrong. It's morally wrong to have 47,000 residents not have a representative on a 5 member city commission. So the two commissioners relented. We had an appointment process. All of us got screened. We had a public hearing, public interviews where we were asked questions by the elected officials, and then they had a vote. And I ended up after it was some time. It took about 2 hours, but 3 out of the 4 commissioners voted for me. Now it is an interim role. I'm still on the ballot as a candidate in November, but as the city attorney said to me, I have all the responsibilities and privileges, because there are some privileges of being a city commissioner in District 4 in Pembroke Pines.
I'm curious. What are the privileges? Like you get to park wherever you want to, or something?
Yeah, you have certain privileges as a city commissioner. For example, you have the ability to vote on the policies that the city establishes. You have the ability to vote on the 500, and we're at about $520 million our budget. So that's, as a citizen, you can certainly make your voice and make your thoughts heard, but you don't have the ability to be one of the 5 that votes
Yeah.
for it. It's not. Yes, I do get a parking spot at City Hall, and it is covered. Which, when we have 120-degree heat like we have right now in the heat index, it's actually welcome. But no, the privilege is the ability to vote on these items, the ability to be able to come in and say, well, let's review policies, let's push to change city policy. And when I moved up here, this was viewed as kind of like a little hamlet in Southwest Broward. Now we're a city of about 175,000 residents. We're the second largest in Broward County, behind Fort Lauderdale. We're the 10th largest city in in the state of Florida, which is the third most populous state in the United States. So it's growing. Now, some folks don't necessarily like that it has grown,
Yeah, of course.
but the truth is that overall, I do think that we've grown intelligently. We haven't grown to the point that our quality of life has severely deteriorated. On the contrary, there's some who will disagree with me, but my district's the largest. It's actually the most populous. So I have 47,000, as I mentioned. I have dozens of homeowners associations, which each have some kind of interface and relationship with city government. So it's a big job. One other cool aspect of it: the city of Pembroke Pines runs the country's largest municipally operated charter system. So we have 6 charter schools that are managed by the city. In Florida, most of the charter schools have a private company that manages their operations, even though they're a public school. In the city of Pembroke Pines, we have some of those. But as a commissioner, you're not just a city commissioner voting on a city budget and cops and firefighters, et cetera. You're also a school board member who votes to set the budget and all of the spending and investment for the charter system that your city runs. We have 5,500 students in our charter schools and a waiting list of 4,000 that would love to
Wow.
get in.
Wow. So I was just stuck in Nashville this week. You know, my flight got canceled and I had to stay over and what have you. And I'm looking out the window of the Hilton B&A airport hotel, and I saw probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 cranes. There's certain places on planet Earth, really in the United States, that like Austin, Texas, Denver, almost everywhere, Florida, and Nashville. You guys need a bumper sticker that says like Florida sucks, don't move here. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, we're starting to see the trend reverse. As a matter
Oh
of
yeah,
fact, I know that during COVID, we saw a lot of influx from northeastern and even some western states. Famously, one very well-known investor moved not only himself and his family, but his company to the city of Miami during COVID. But I think we've discussed this before. Part of the challenge in Florida is yes, you don't have a state income tax, but there are these things called user fees and cost of living. You pay on almost every highway, okay, to drive, and you certainly have it's roughly 3% of whatever your property value was when you purchased it. You're going to pay that in annual property taxes. So Florida is a system where a state where if you've been here a long time and you bought a home when prices were reasonable, you're probably okay. If you're coming in now, where real estate all over the state is hot, it's frankly a lot of folks are going to be rethinking it because you start to
yeah.
see your annual tax bill, you start to see your homeowner's insurance, and so we are seeing maybe not a complete reversal of what happened during COVID, but we're seeing a very clear softening of folks moving in, and we're starting to see in the tracking more folks moving out. They're not necessarily going back to wherever it is they came from, but they are relocating to lower cost of living states. Even if those states have state income taxes, they still have a lower cost of living. So I'm pretty sure, and I don't have that data, but North Carolina, Georgia, maybe South
You know
Carolina,
what they
I'm
call that?
pretty sure that they're benefiting from that outflux of migration now.
You know what they call that?
What's that?
They call it halfbackers. That's New Yorkers that moved to Florida, didn't like it, and moved halfway back.
Well, I got to tell you, you guys and my in-laws are from New York, so I've seen it. For whatever reason, Florida is where so many of these New Yorkers have been, especially Boca and in Palm Beach County, where they're looking to retire, and that's great. Don't get me wrong, but for you're a business guy and you consult chief executive officers. Part of the challenge that we have heard CEOs are having in the state of Florida is that they don't necessarily have the talent to hire locally.
Yeah,
That's a part of the problem, right? And then when you have, well, I've always used my brother as an example. He's an electrical engineer. Yeah, there's work in Florida, but the kind of electrical engineer that he is and what he specializes in, you're a Midwesterner. You got to be up there. That's where the majority of the work is going to be. Florida, we really need to address the talent issue with folks leaving to other parts of the country for better opportunities. And we also have to address the fact that our economy, I mean, if you love theme parks, if you love tourism and beaches, we're the spot, right? But we have the space industry growing in Florida, especially where my in-laws live half the year in Melbourne. We have to diversify that economy and bring more of those types of companies that will naturally lead to more folks moving in here that have that expertise, and that will lead to diversification. If we have any economic recession in Florida, we feel it worse. If we have it nationally, we feel it worse in Florida. If there's a
you also have,
downturn in
you
real
also have,
estate, go ahead.
you also have tourism too that kind of buoys you during that time period. It's almost like if I just did an analysis of this just the other day. So if you
Right.
look at the island nations like Oceania, the Caribbean, what have you, they really felt COVID on the chin, and none of the islands have actually fully recovered. In fact, the island of Bermuda hasn't fully recovered from 9/11 yet because they're so dependent on tourism. Florida's like the perfect match of the two because you do have a really healthy, vibrant economy for the private middle market companies, and you have the tourism. So you kind of have both, and they can move independently of each other, which is also like a strong suit. What I would argue is like if I was sitting down with your mayor or your governor and you, I'd be talking about an actual outbound campaign to steal companies from California and New York.
Right. Yeah. So that was an initiative under our previous governor. So Rick Scott tried, and he had some success, especially when it came to manufacturing. He wanted to bring more manufacturing to the state because they're solid jobs. They may not have pensions as often as they did before, but they provide the basis for some kind of economic growth, and you could raise a middle class family on them. And so he had some success. The challenge was the cost of living in the state. So there's you can't really hide anywhere from the high costs, right? And now part of the challenges is the state legislature really didn't address the home insurance issue. So look, I got dropped from my homeowner's insurance. Okay, I've never missed a payment, but I got dropped. And now we've been scrambling for weeks to try to get one. Well, guess what? It's 25% more than the previous insurer, and
Yeah,
they cover less. So for good
yeah,
measure, they cover less. So those are the issues that I don't disagree with you, especially California has a ridiculously high, in my opinion, taxation rate for corporations. I would love to bring them here. I just think it becomes, you can only do so much work from home. You can only do so much work from home. You're going to have talent that is in your company
yeah.
physically. And when that becomes the case, then you have to, if you're Florida, you have to make sure the talent stays, because we have excellent public universities, but we can't have, we haven't been able to keep that talent, and they haven't necessarily had the jobs to be able to say, I can live here. For example, I was with the fire department here yesterday, part of my orientation as a commissioner. One of the major challenges is these new recruits that they bring in that go through our fire academy. We're class A. We're the top rated you can receive as a fire department. But the problem is these guys, many of them who grew up in Southwest Broward or in this city, they get good paying jobs as firefighters, but they can't afford homes in the city where they grew up in and are now protecting. You know, we have townhomes going up across the street from me that are starting in the 500s. If you're a 25, 26-year-old kid, you're not going to be able to pay $500,000 and have the interest rates that we have today. So those are some of the challenges that you have, not just here, but all across the state of Florida and different areas. Obviously, if you're moving to, more rural settings, okay, you're not going to have as large of an issue. Or if you own your home outright and you don't need property insurance, you might be okay.
So
Um,
I think there's some things that were happened here on Long Island that would actually help Florida.
right,
Like for example, when new homes are built, especially on farmland, what was once farmland, you have to pay like 50 grand up front. It's wrapped into your mortgage, and that's donated to a fund that allows the state to buy land and make sure no one can ever
and
build on that.
conservation programs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So, but there's also another one too, of the island nations or the island states like Hawaii. The native population doesn't pay the same for a house that a person
right,
from the mainland does. Same thing happens in Bermuda too. Like the only way for you to buy this, well, this is a rumor, so don't hold me to this. The only way an American can buy land in on the island of Bermuda is you have to buy it from an American who wants to sell it, and those go for millions. Yet the
right.
people who actually were born native, they can trade their land to each other, and it's much lower cost overall.
Right. Like one of the challenges, I know in Dade County they have this, but if you, the county actively tries to purchase what's called environmentally endangered lands. The EEL
Yes.
program is what they call it. And oftentimes developers, in order to be granted permission to develop wherever, they will purchase thousands of acres and turn it over to you.
Yeah.
And the county preserves it. Here in Pines, what we're trying to do is something similar. We don't have farmland per se, although it may have been designated ag land 30, 40 years ago when some of these companies had purchased the property and now are developing them. But Florida, to my knowledge, doesn't have that. What they rely on
Yeah.
is more of a let's restore the Everglades and this is how we do it. Or the state will have purchased brownfields. They used
Hmm.
to do that. They would buy brownfields and then try to get the environmental engineers to come in to create some kind of wetland. We do that in the city of Pembroke Pines, but something like what you're saying is revolutionary. The problem is that if it goes before the legislature, they may not want it. But if they were to do it, The challenge all cities in Florida are having is home rule is just under assault. Tallahassee is basically telling you how you can regulate everything, something that is not what used to be the case in the state. Used to local control meant local control. You
Yeah,
could
yeah, yeah.
decide certain things.
It
Uh,
does. It does shock. Two things shock me about that. One is, I've presented all over Florida. Pensacola, Gainesville, and those things seem like, especially between those two cities, or between like Gainesville and Jacksonville, there were
yeah,
stretches of land there that were really just farmland.
yeah,
That and like shacky type houses, not like these palatial things you see on the coasts, or certainly on the Treasure Coast of Florida. So I would think that if a manufacturer was to move into those type of areas where it's like low end manufacturing, or it's where it's not like heavy intense intellectual property type stuff, I would see that as a possibility.
yeah.
The other one is that I ran into a company out of I think it was New Orleans, or maybe Baton Rouge, if memory serves correctly. And what they did was they created a family office, created a fund, and bought wetlands in Florida, like major swaths of it. So
Right,
what happens is, like, let's say you want to build a Taco Bell at the outskirts of one of the cities within Florida. You'd have to pay them to secure the land, the wetlands,
right,
and then,
right.
then you could do whatever you wanted to on that
So we
land.
have that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that we do have. So in the city of Pembroke Pines, one of my business partners, before way back, I don't even know. Well before I even moved up here, well before I even had kids, he knew that that was going to be an issue. So he actually restored 450 acres, if I'm not mistaken, of wetland. It's just northwest of my house, so I actually see it whenever I drop my kids off at school.
Wow.
And he allowed developers from Miramar and Pembroke Pines and all around the area who were developing the communities like the one I live in now to purchase wetland credits
Yes.
from that site. Then he turned it over to the city of Pembroke Pines, and today it's actually the Chapel Trail Nature Preserve. So it's a nature preserve that I could go to right now if it weren't 157 degrees. But that's where now you can't buy wetland credits anymore. Now there's some federal credit program, but that's the kind of innovative thinking that we are slowly discussing in the city right now. We're kind of diving into the charter budget and the city budget, but that's the kind of stuff that it deserves a conversation. What can we do to, yes, preserve quality of life, but also there's a northwestern portion of the city where you have not industrial warehousing and not a lot of manufacturing, but you have the space for it and the buildings already there. There's an energy drink company that has a facility there. I don't know if it's 50,000 or 500,000 square feet. It's a very very large, but that's the kind of innovative thinking. And if you could get some folks to actually work there and be able to live in the area, you start addressing some of those challenges. But it's not easy by any
Well,
means.
let's get back to the commissioner role. Is being appointed commissioner, is that going to be easier for you to win the election when the special election
So,
comes in?
so that was a concern, and here's the problem: there's absolutely no evidence that it has helped anyone. So in 2018, ironically, one of the two commissioners that initially opposed my appointment and eventually voted for me, he ran against an appointed commissioner who had a 6-month term, very involved with the local chamber of commerce, so he was very well known. He ran against him and beat him. And in 2020, my commissioner had lost the mayor's race, so he had vacated his seat. He ran for his seat again, but in the 6 months between the time that he lost the mayor's race and he was running again for that seat, the interim commissioner that had been appointed was governing, was sitting there, was voting, and he beat her pretty handily. So I understand what some folks would say. Like in New York, you guys had Kirsten Gillibrand that was appointed senator and then ran and has subsequently won in each election.
I think Hochul did too, the governor.
It could be, yes. I think Hochul inherited the governor's mansion because of what happened with your previous
Yeah, I
governor.
think she was lieutenant governor, and then
Right,
Andrew Cuomo had to step down.
right. But at the local municipal level, number one, we're not governors, we're not senators. You may know your local commissioner if he or she is very active in the community. Otherwise, you don't really know who they are. So what really, really, really matters is are they doing a good job as a candidate or as a commissioner? And do we vote for them? The incumbency at this level in the city of Pembroke Pines did not make a difference in the last two elections. It was basically somebody who was there who was taking votes. Two guys ran in two different elections, 2 different years, and they unseated that interim commissioner. And I also took a pledge because one of those commissioners expressed grave concerns that I could say re-elect on my campaign material because I was an incumbent, even though I was an interim, and I pledged there in front of the 200 residents that were at the city commission. I pledged not to use the word re-elect in my election material. I said elect because I understand that I'm an interim.
Yeah, because I don't know if you know this, but something like 76% of people get reelected.
Right. Well, in the House of Representatives in D.C., it might be a little bit higher.
So picture, I saw this psychological study of 3-year-olds, and
Uh,
they would take a look at the candidates' faces and their pictures, and they had something like an 85% accuracy rating picking the winner
really?
just based on the person's face. There's also a thing called the big man scenario where, in time periods of crisis, historically, from an evolutionary perspective, we would rally around the big man because we were basically in bands or tribes, right?
Right.
So if we ran into a hostile tribe across the other side of the mountain or whatever, we had to rally around the strongest, toughest man. So we tend to elect the taller of the two candidates, something like 76% of the time, like a crazy number like that.
It makes sense, but I'm a little concerned because I'm only 5'11" and 3/4. So
And
I mean,
who's your opponent?
right now, as of today, I have three opponents. One of them no one really knows. We've never met, and one is works for his family's local business. Another one works for the school district. I'm pretty sure I'm taller than two out of the three opponents. I haven't met the third one, so we'll see. But if I will tell you that I've worked at all levels, I can say confidently, of government, whether what not necessarily always as an employee, but as someone who has worked congressional campaigns that were successful, the gubernatorial campaign in Florida that they were unsuccessful, and Miami-Dade County, and then all the international work that I did. Here's the truth: voters reward people who, despite all the BS that we see on television, they reward people who they feel actually do something in office positively for their constituents. And I saw it in a large government like Miami-Dade County, where I set up a weekly radio program for residents to call in. It was in Spanish because that particular station was in Spanish, but we did some English language as well, where residents would call in and basically speak to the county mayor himself or me as his communications director, and we would try to resolve their problems right away. And I always say this: Miami-Dade County is still an overwhelmingly Democratic county, and yet they elected Carlos Menes, a Republican, 3 times. I think that's because Carlos did a good job as mayor.
Hmm.
And yes, there's partisanship, there's ideology, there's all this. Really, it is bullshit, and I can say that because I've worked with both parties. None of I don't believe that most of them actually believe the crap that they say. Oftentimes on cable news, it really just comes down to: is your congressional office, are they processing passport applications? Are they helping you with Social Security inquiries and Medicare inquiries? That's what congressional offices do. We think that they're always arguing about eyelashes and all the other things that we've seen recently in cable news.
Yes.
The vast majority of that, what happens in the House of Representatives, and the congressman that we'll have on the podcast soon can tell you, it really has nothing to do with that. And
Well,
this,
that's kind of cool because here's my concern from the outsider perspective. It looks like, especially the high profile positions like senator and president, certainly, that there's a certain type of narcissistic personality that's attracted to it.
oh
That
yeah,
there's so much BS that comes with it, so much
right,
vitriol that you get spewed your direction just simply because you're not part of the other side's tribe.
right.
Then what ends up happening is like normal people don't chase those type of positions because who the hell would ever want to be the
Well,
president of
that's
the United
absolutely
States?
right. That's
So
absolutely
I
right.
see that
And
as one thing. The other thing though is like, and this is where you as an insider on the local level and all of what you've counseled on the higher levels is I don't think, now this might be a mistake on my part, I don't think you're going to get the corrupt personality that chases the lower level politician positions because they're kind of like a thankless public
Yeah,
servant.
yeah. I mean, there is obviously corruption in local politics. The city of Miami is a perfect example where they just had a commissioner arrested. But the truth is that the vast majority of folks nowadays, and this is rough, and I talk about it with my graduate students at FIU, or I would say it on television. I'm on my old station last night. I recorded for the Sunday program talking about local government. Uh, for a democracy to work, you have to have candidates. You have to have people willing to put their names on a ballot and run on something. And then when they get into office, they need to be able to get things done for the people that voted them in. And I'm not going to use, I've only been there 8 days, okay? But here's an example of what the previous commissioner did and why he's now our first Hispanic mayor, and why despite the fact that we're still not a Hispanic majority city, and yet he was elected. And it was I immediately spoke to HOA presidents. I showed up at their HOA meetings at their invitation. I drove the neighborhood taking photos of a very hastily done and shoddy work of repaving streets that I understand it doesn't seem, it's not sexy, it's not going to make the evening news, but these streets residents pay for, and if the paving job sucks, they're going to be upset. I took video, I took photos, I went to the city manager, I spoke to city leadership. We got a listening tour together. You know why I feel I will be rewarded in November? Because I'm doing that.
Gotcha.
That's really what they want. Yes, there's gerrymandering at the congressional level, even here in the state legislature. I understand all that, but I do believe on the local level, the vast majority of folks that win, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, it's because they've done something and they've answered text messages from residents and phone calls, and they've shown up at your house because you said, I have this major problem. I think it's the city's pipe that burst. That I feel is part of the equation, and we shouldn't just eliminate that and say, oh, it's just no one votes. Well, that's not necessarily true either. In Florida, folks are voting. They vote by mail, they vote in person. So that's not the case either. I think we're all voting more as a country. It's more of the toxicity of Washington sometimes bleeds down, and I don't want that. We don't want that at the local level. We just want to get things done.
Well, we've
And
certainly talked a lot about displaced religiosity, so we don't need to cover it in this video. But there are two things that we haven't covered before, and I want to get your opinion on as an insider. The first one is I see corruption in an unusual way from political contribution. So if I understand it correctly, now I could be wrong about this, but the rumor that I heard just recently, in order to run for Senate on the national level, it's somewhere between 200 and 400 million dollars each election. So now that has to come from certain places,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
majority of people that make political contributions are so infinitesimal. I'm talking about north of $10,000.
right,
Like it might be 1/10 of 1%. So it's the billionaire.
right.
So that you argue is like so the billionaires own the senators. Like I'll give you a perfect example. Jonathan Haidt's most recent book is called The Anxious Generation. So we have three options to fix teenage female suicide rates. So what you have is you have between 12 and 14-year-old girls, the suicide rate is up 158%. That's crazy, right? So and the culprit is likely social media. They didn't like it that I said that out loud in San Francisco, but I'm decided, Mike, I'm not speaking in San Francisco anymore because they don't want to hear truth. They want me to tell them they're right when they're actually wrong.
You're gonna you're talking about the tech sector in Tech City. I get it.
And it's not them all. Let me just tell you, it's not all of them.
Yeah,
80% of the people in the audiences were great. 20% were not listening. They were listening in order to jump on me, try to catch me with something wrong when I wasn't wrong. So it's like, that's not listening. You know what I mean? So I've decided to leave them to their fate. I don't feel like flying across the country to get the crap kicked out of me again. It's like flying into a firing squad. It's the dumbest thing I've ever done.
well, just to real quick, because I know our time is limited, but I do want to touch on the contributions. Number one, it's unfortunate, but once these guardrails that were put up actually by the late John McCain and a very liberal senator from Wisconsin, Russ Feingold, and George W. Bush signed this into law. They had guardrails on how it is that you can contribute, how much it is that you can contribute, and the groups, the dark money as they call it, that can contribute anonymously. to the either the candidate or supporting the candidate. The Supreme Court did away with a lot of that
That's
in
terrible.
2010.
And I wonder why. Okay, so let me finish this point because I'm tying it back together here.
Right.
Right, so there's three options we have to minimize social media induced suicides by young girls. And the concept is the first one is we could de algorithmatize social media. And the chance of that happening is nil because the
Mm.
social media billionaires make political contributions, at least likely make political
Right.
contributions, but smart. So they own the higher levels of Washington. So Washington's not going to force them to de algorithmatize social media for children under a certain age. So the argument now this is a synthesis between Dr. Luann Brizendine, who wrote The Female
The
Brain.
female brain.
She's the lead researcher in studying the differences between the male and female brain. And I'll make a declaration here: we're getting her on this show.
I would
So
love
the
to have her on.
yeah, so picture. I'm going to explain to you later on how I'm going to do it. But the deal is that according to her and Jonathan Haidt, who's a moral psychologist at NYU, who's written 4 books on the subject, 2 specifically about these next generations, and introduced the whole concept to me around how teenage female suicides are up so high. That females are significantly more sensitive on average to social comparison and what is social.
Right.
So picture so there's 3 options we have. The first is to de-algorithmatize social media. That's not going to happen. That's what Senator Blumenthal wants to happen out of Connecticut,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's. I don't. He hasn't gotten any traction with it. I don't think he's gonna. So our other recourse is when you interview the young students, according to Height, and say to them, "What if Instagram never existed?" They kind of sit forward in their chair and they get excited, like that'd be great, like a heroin addict saying, "I wish they never invented heroin." Right?
The dopamine hits.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
picture but then if you say to them, well, what if you can't be on Instagram, but your friends can be?
That
That's
that
torturous to them.
yeah, that's
So,
torturous.
so the last resort, and this is something maybe you can help out, certainly in your district, especially when you become commissioner, officially win the election, that there are bags that you can put cell phones in to make them inoperable for however long they're in those bags. Like if the schools had that because the parents allowed it. Believe it or not, it's the parents who don't want to have no access to their kids.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yet it's increasing suicide. So it's like if we can kind of win them over, then we can force it to happen. That'll negatively affect social media, but the idea is who cares about that? What we want to do is
Well,
minimize
in Florida,
suicide.
they banned the legislature just signed into the legislature just approved and the governor signed into law. But now there's a court challenge to not allow anyone under the age of I believe it was 16, if I'm not mistaken, anyone under the age of 16 to actually have a social media account. I don't think it's enforced yet because of the challenges,
Yeah.
but I see the good and the bad. Obviously, the bad of social media, but I got to tell you, whether it was working campaigns or consulting, like I do my day job, because my day job is not commissioner, it's running my own business and the communications consulting that I provide C-suite members. Right now, you can't not be on social media as a large company. You have to know what's being said about you, etc. And there's a whole industry now of folks that are social media mavens that figure things out, but and position you correctly. But I also think that there's this over reliance. I think there's always an overcorrection and an over reliance, depending upon which stage of the game you're in. Right now, there's an over reliance on it because no matter how great your graphics are, if your product sucks, you're not your sales are going to eventually come down. If you have a wonderful social media team that makes you sound great when you give a speech to one of the groups that you give a speech to, but then you go and you give an actual speech and folks are sitting there and you're not doing well, they're not going to invite you back. They might all treat you like San Francisco, but that's part of why I think there have to be guardrails that you yourself, forget the law, the folks that make the laws, you yourself have to implement. And as a company, as a professional, as a politician, you can't really say my entire business strategy or my personal life is going to revolve around the algorithm, because the algorithm is being built by very intelligent people, usually in California, but other parts of the country, that are just figuring out how your brain works and what it is that you want to see.
And it's designed to be addictive. You know?
Well, like you said, it's heroin. I mean, I've read studies where it gives you basically the same kind of high when you get these notifications on your phone. So now they're advising some folks. Some folks are out there saying perhaps you turn your notifications off. If someone really, really, really needs you, they're going to call you, and you'll
Yeah.
see the name. But
It's gonna be interesting to see long term what the psychological effects of all this is, because my wife just asked me today. We're sitting on the porch getting ready for the thing, and she goes, "Are you ever nervous before you start doing one of these?" I'm like, "No." Like,
no,
I don't know if I ever told you this, Mike, but I was 6 years old when the first knife was pulled on me in Queens. Right, so it was 1972, 72, yeah, 72, and another kid pulled a knife on me.
wow,
So you're not pulling a knife on me. I'm not nervous. You know what I mean? Now, okay, so your generation and certainly Gen Z haven't had to experience that level of violence, or maybe not. I'm making an assumption about you, but I'm assuming from your expression when you heard me say that. But there were two
yeah,
days in my life growing up in Queens, and where I grew up was actually really quite nice, especially for New York City. But there was violence like maybe 3, 4 blocks away. So there were 2 days in my life that I don't remember my feet touching the ground. Like forget Usain Bolt. I was the fastest human being on the planet. There just wasn't anybody there with a stopwatch, right? And I ran, like, no exaggeration, probably 8 city blocks. I should go back to the GPS to see, because I knew where I was when I stopped running, and I was lying on the ground with my chest just heaving, trying to get the oxygen, and my heart was pumping battery acid. Maybe it's the reason why I had a heart condition. You know what I mean? At 56 years old. So picture the what happens is, when you were a latchkey kid, like a Gen Xer, now today, if you're going to raise a child like that, like you actually made a commitment to actually say, I'm going to raise a free range child. If
right,
you actually did that, you'd have to report yourself to the police. Otherwise, if they found your kid unsupervised, they'd arrest you and take your kid away for neglect. So
wow.
parenting in my parents' day was actual neglect. It's legal neglect now, right? So that kind of ties back into what we were talking about with Jonathan Haidt and the mental illness crisis. My point, though, is where we got into that was about potential corruption. All right, so
Yeah,
picture there's a secondary part of this too. I forget who it was. I think it might have been Clinton, but they suddenly, definitely was Obama. It was definitely on Obama's watch, I should say. They started allowing pharmaceuticals to advertise on television.
right.
I can make a strong argument that they don't advertise on television to get you to remember their medication, because the names of these things are so difficult to remember. They have to make up fake ones. They get on television to make sure television cannot report them when they do things that are wrong. Right? There's a concept out there called the Vioxx scandal. So I think it was 2005. Merck cooked the books and lied to the FDA about the efficacy and safety of Vioxx. The following year, once it got approved, it killed 30,000 extra Americans. So
I remember something about this. Yeah,
yeah,
2005.
now
I was getting out of college.
you're an informed guy, and my audiences, who are typically informed people, the CEO, they got a lot riding on them, making excellent decisions, so they tend to be really well informed. What do you think the percentage of my audiences have heard of the Vioxx scandal
10,
before I start talking about it?
10%.
Exactly right. There's one person in 10 will put their hands in the air. And then I'll ask them, why do you know about that? And they're in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah,
So it's like probably 50% of who has said, presents themselves as, yes, I heard about this before. So not only did Merck not get shut down for that, they actually only had to pay back some of the profit.
right.
Holy crap, like, what are we doing? So
Yeah,
and Fox News and MSNBC could not report on it because 79% of their advertising revenue comes from pharmaceuticals.
right.
So that's the reason why no one makes fun of these things on Saturday Night Live or what have you. That's a form of corruption. So what I'm arguing is that politicians, especially at the level that we're discussing at, right, not the local level, but the level of Washington, let's call it, they're supposed to protect us from a handful of things. They're called superorganisms. They
Yes,
are asteroid strikes. They are pandemics. They are rogue corporations, rogue entities, meaning rogue states like called Iran, and then lastly, billionaires. And yet, because of the political contribution situation we have, not
right.
only are we not being informed, Fox News, MSNBC has to lie to us, but the politicians have to lie to us too. So the argument here is if we just had campaign reform, we might make a ton of that actually go away.
Well, campaign reform is something that everyone likes to say that they will do and they never actually do because ultimately it's a form of influence. I'm not going to say it's control because occasionally we do have elected officials who are willing to take difficult votes even if it hurts contributors, but that's only occasionally. I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to campaign finance reform. I understand that the vast majority of campaigning is actually done in states. I mean, when you think about it, Washington is actually quite small, 435 members of the House and 100 senators. You know, you have thousands of elected officials in the states, in the state house, Senate, etc. But at the federal level, that they definitely need reform. At the local level, it's a little bit better policed. At the federal level, you don't have to disclose as much personal information as you do at the state and local level. So it may. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but it may actually just need to. You may have to flip it and say that Washington's regulations or Washington's reporting requirements, whether a campaign or of elected officials, may eventually have to become more like certain states and inject more transparency. And yes, limit contributions, probably eliminate a lot of the dark money groups that are out there that are going to try and influence candidates and elections. So yeah, that a lot of that also needs to happen. But don't hold your breath. I mean, they've gotten some things done in Congress over the last 3.5, 4 years with an infrastructure bill, a Chips and Science Act. You know, those are good things, but they haven't really touched or come near campaign reform. I don't think that's going to happen in the near future.